The city was shrouded in a thick fog. The dim lights of the street lamps reflected in the rain-wet roads, giving the street a mysterious and ominous appearance. It was an ordinary evening for the police. Occasional calls for domestic quarrels, minor offenses. But no one expected that on this quiet autumn evening, in the heart of the city, one of the most mysterious and frightening series of crimes in its history would begin in the heart of the city. The year 2024, the university campus of the city of Grandville. 5 criminology students have gathered in the auditorium for their last lecture on forensic psychology. Their instructor, Professor Kearns, was known for his unconventional views on criminology and his interest in unsolved cases. "So, gentlemen," the professor began, "today we will examine one of the darkest and most mysterious cases in our city's history. It is the case of the so-called shadow murders that took place 20 years ago." The group of students perked up. They included Thomas, the team leader who had a passion for forensics since childhood; Amelia, an expert in forensic psychology; Josh, a hacker who could crack any computer; Sam, a photographer with a great eye for detail; and Liz, a historian who had a passion for archival investigations. There are a number of unsolved cases involving this killer. They have all been meticulously documented but still lack a clear conclusion. Today we will look at how witnesses and circumstances can influence the outcome of investigations. Now to the point. It is up to you to reconstruct the course of these crimes using the available materials. This will be your final research project. A fire of enthusiasm flashed in Thomas's eyes. He had known about the murders for a long time. The Shadows case was one of the most complex in their city's history. He turned to his friends. "I think this is going to be the best project we've ever done. I'll start digging through the archives already." Several days passed. Thomas and his team went to the archives of the city's police department. An old sergeant working in the archives gave them huge folders of material: witness interviews, forensic reports, crime scene photos. "Look," Thomas said, laying out the documents in front of his friends. "All the murders took place within a 6-month period. The victims are men and women between the ages of 25 and 40. They were all found dead in abandoned places in the city." "And the cause of death?" Amelia asked, going through the paperwork. "Each victim was killed the same way, strangled with a thin wire, leaving deep cuts in the skin." Josh muttered, not looking away from the computer. "I'm trying to find any information on possible suspects or similar cases in other regions, but nothing so far." "That's odd," Liz said, as she studied the dates of the murders. "Look, they all happened on the same day of the month. That's no coincidence." That detail alarmed everyone. They now knew for sure that an organized and calculating criminal was behind the murders. Liz continued digging through the old newspapers and suddenly came across a small article. It talks about a witness who saw someone near one of the murder scenes, but his testimony was deemed unreliable because of his mental state. "I wonder if that witness is still alive," Thomas wondered. The students decided to visit the very witness. He lived on the outskirts of town, in a small house near the forest. When they approached his house, they were greeted by an old woman, his sister. "He doesn't speak to strangers," she said, closing the door in their faces. Thomas and his team did not give up, however. They returned time after time trying to talk to him. Finally, after days of persistence, the woman reluctantly let them in. They entered a dark room. On the bed sat an old man, thin, with gray hair and deep wrinkles on his face. His eyes glittered with a strange light. "Do you want to hear what I saw?" he whispered. "I saw a shadow. It was not just a figure. It was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It watched me, laughed, and then disappeared. No one believed me, but I know the shadow is real. Amelia tried to find out more. You say you saw her at the murder scene? The old man nodded. It was in an old abandoned house. I was walking by and suddenly everything around me went dark, as if day had turned to night. Then I saw her, a shadow. She just stood there, watching the body, and then it was gone. The team left the house, puzzled by his story. Thomas wondered aloud. Perhaps it's just an old man's fantasy, but what if there's something more behind it? The team decided to check out the old abandoned house the witness had mentioned. This place had long attracted the attention of forensics. About 20 years ago, one of the murders happened here. The house was empty except for old furniture covered in dust. It was cold and quiet inside. We need to look around, Thomas said. Look at the walls, the floors, see if we can find anything strange. They split up, and after a while Josh noticed something in one corner, an old, almost obliterated symbol scratched into the wall. He took a few pictures and called the others over. Look at this, Josh said, pointing to the symbol. It's some sort of ancient sign, maybe occult? Liz frowned. I've seen that symbol somewhere before. It was used in the rituals of medieval sects involving the summoning of spirits or shadows. Delving deeper into the history of the house, the students discovered that in the 18th century it had belonged to the Dalton family, one of the most influential in the town. However, their reputation was tarnished by rumors that the Daltons were involved in occult practices. During their trial for witchcraft, many members of the family disappeared under mysterious circumstances. They were said to have vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only strange marks on the walls. Amelia, having scrutinized the old records, shared her thoughts with the team. It may sound fantastic, but the killer clearly knew about this story. He may have specifically chosen this house for one of his crimes to enhance the mystical element. But why? Josh persisted. Killers aren't usually prone to theatrics unless it's part of their plan. Thomas interrupted him. Or it's not a common killer. What if we're not dealing with an individual but a group, cult, or sect that's still active? They could be mimicking the ancient rituals of the Dalton family. Liz, who was an expert in historical matters, nodded. I've studied the occult movements of the time. If the killer does use the symbols and practices of ancient sects, perhaps he's trying to perform a ritual or complete what his predecessors failed to do. Or he's imitating them, Amelia said thoughtfully. Either way, we need more evidence. Maybe the other murder sites have these symbols too. The students now concentrated on the locations where the murders had taken place. They began traveling to each one, trying to find recurring symbols or other odd details that might indicate a connection to occult practices. Most of the locations had long since been rebuilt or abandoned, but a few buildings remained intact from those times. In one of the old abandoned warehouses, they found something frightening, another occult symbol, but this time freshly engraved on the floor, as if someone had been here recently. It's definitely a fresh mark, Liz remarked, gingerly touching the symbol. Someone has literally been here recently. It looks like we're getting closer to a clue, Thomas said, feeling nervous. But what is this ritual? Amelia asked. What does it have to do with the murders? Everyone was silent until Josh, still on his laptop, spoke. I've hacked into the closed police files. There are records of similar crimes in other parts of the country. And surprisingly, they too have gone unsolved. The exact same symbols were found at crime scenes in different cities. That means there's more than one killer, Thomas said, realizing the scale of the problem. It's a network or a group that operates all over the country, possibly the world. Amelia looked around and sighed. This is more than just murders. We're dealing with something ancient, occult, and dangerous. As the investigation continued, the team felt more and more pressured. They knew someone was watching their actions. There were strange calls, messages with no sender, and one day, while driving back to the university, Thomas found a small paper envelope in his car. Inside was a photograph of him and the team, apparently taken from a distance as they surveyed a crime scene. "We're being threatened," he said as he showed the picture to his friends. Amelia looked at the image and said, "It's not just research anymore. We are involved in this case for real." Thomas was determined. He couldn't back down now that they were so close to solving it. They returned to the archives but found that some of the case files from 20 years ago had suddenly disappeared. Someone had clearly tried to cover their tracks. "It's more than just murders," Josh concluded. "It's a network that works both within the police force and possibly in the higher echelons of government." Meanwhile, Liz continued to study the symbols and found that their structure correlated with the map of the city. All the symbols were arranged in the form of an ancient magic circle covering key locations in the city. This led the students to believe that the murders were part of some kind of ritual. Could it be that someone is trying to complete a ritual that was started 20 years ago? Liz asked. "If that's the case," replied Thomas, "then the next victim will be at one of the key locations on the map." After putting all the fragments together, the team realized that they had a chance to prevent the next murder. Using the map, they figured out the possible location of the next crime, an old church that had long been abandoned and surrounded by mystical rumors. They decided to act quickly and traveled there at night, hoping to catch the killer in the act. The church loomed before them as a grim silhouette engulfed in darkness. They stepped inside and began to look round the building when suddenly they heard footsteps somewhere upstairs. Their hearts beat faster. Josh pulled out a torch, but the light only served to heighten the tension, drawing frightening shadows out of the darkness. "We need to split up," Thomas said. "I'll go upstairs, and you can look downstairs." The others reluctantly agreed and went around the building. Thomas climbed the creaky stairs, feeling the adrenaline pulsing through his veins. When he reached the top floor, he saw what he least expected: a strange figure standing in front of the altar, surrounded by candles. It was a man in a black cloak who seemed oblivious to his presence. "Who are you?" Thomas shouted, pointing his torch at the figure. The man turned round, but his face was hidden under a hood. Suddenly, Thomas felt the floor beneath him shake, as if the church itself was coming to life. The walls faltered, and it seemed as if the darkness enveloping the figure was alive. The figure took a step forwards, and Thomas felt the cold penetrating him to the bone. Before he could do anything, the figure disappeared in the blink of an eye, leaving behind only the smell of burning candles. After the figure disappeared, Thomas joined the others. They found another symbol on the altar, but this time it was complete. Around it lay old, frayed book pages covered in ancient inscriptions. "It's a ritual," Liz said, studying the writings. "The killer completed the ritual. We were too late." "But who is he?" Josh asked. "Why is he here? And what is this ritual?" Amelia pointed to the pages. "Apparently, it's the summoning of the shadow, an ancient ritual that allows you to manipulate death and life by summoning something from the darkness. Perhaps the killer had been part of this plan all these years, and now he had completed the ritual." Thomas shook his head. "But why? What did he gain in the end?" They didn't have time to answer that question. A strange sound came from outside. someone was approaching the church. Figures in black cloaks appeared out of the darkness. They were the cult members the students had been looking for so long. Their leader, a tall, hooded man, slowly approached and without hesitation began to speak. "You have gone too far. We have been watching you from the beginning. You should have put this matter behind you." The students, gripped by fear, realized that there was no way out. The leader took a step forward, raising his hand as if about to strike, but suddenly sirens were heard outside. It was the police the students had reported before leaving. The cult was caught off guard. The cult members tried to escape, but they were all arrested. Several months passed. Thomas and his team received commendations for their investigation, though the case was still a mystery. It turned out that the killer they were looking for was just part of a larger network that operated in different parts of the country. Many cult members were arrested, but their leader was never found. Still, the series of murders in the city had stopped, leaving behind a trail of unsolved mysteries. Amelia, looking at an old photograph of the symbol, said, "We've only touched the surface. Who knows what other mysteries lurk in the shadows?"